This episode may contain content of a graphic nature, including descriptions of physical and sexual violence against adults, children, and animals. Listener discretion is advised.
Hi everyone, I'm Tanya.
And I'm Talia.
And we are Crimes and Consequences, a true crime podcast. Hey Talia.
Hi Tanya.
How are you today?
I'm doing so great. How are you?
I am doing great too. The episode that I'm going to do today was a former members only episode. And because it's one of our most popular, I thought that we could re-record it and re-release it for the masses.
Oh, sounds good.
All right. So you've heard this one, but it's been a long time.
It has been a long time, and I remember it being a 10 on our gruesome scale.
Yeah, this one's pretty bad. So I'm just warning everybody ahead of time.
I still have PTSD from it. I don't remember all the details. So let's go ahead and just traumatize me again.
I know. I just remember it was horrible. So
that being said, let's do it.
The story today is about the serial killer, Robert Berdella. And I'm going to refer to him as Bob throughout the episode. He was born January 31st, 1949 in Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio. His family, they were very religious. They were Catholic, Italian Americans, so they went to Mass regularly. His dad worked for Ford Motor Company. When he was a child, he had to wear really thick glasses. He took medication for high blood pressure, and he had a speech impediment, so of course he was the target of many bullies at school.
And often serial killers have speech impediments.
Do they really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
You never watched Mindhunter?
I did watch Mindhunter.
You never heard about that?
Really?
Yeah.
Well, here you go.
Maybe I'm making it up. I could be. I don't know.
Bob's teacher said he had above average intelligence, but he was described as a loner and had very few friends. He preferred activities that he did alone, like stamp and coin collecting and painting. It had been reported that his father abused him verbally and physically, mainly because Bob wasn't very athletic. He had a younger brother that was, and his dad favored him. In 1966, when he was 16, Bob's father passed away suddenly from a heart attack. This really affected teenage Bob. His mother remarried a short time after his dad died, and Bob was really angry about it, and he refused to accept his new stepfather. He felt like his mother's remarriage was a betrayal on his father. Even though he didn't get along well with his father, he still felt that way.
And his father was dead.
When Bob was in high school, he realized that he was gay, but he wasn't out. Also at that time, he worked as a line cook at a local restaurant where he says he was sexually assaulted by another male employee, which wasn't reported to the police at the time and was kept secret from his friends and family. This was Bob's first homosexual experience. A short time after this assault, Bob saw a movie called The Collector.
Oh, God.
You kind of remember this, don't you?
Yeah, and I know Leonard Lake loved The Collector, and I'm working on another story where the guy loved The Collector.
I guess this movie apparently was jacked because...
I'm going to have to watch it.
I know. The story in the movie was about a man who was obsessed with a female coworker who he kidnaps and takes as his prisoner. The man in the movie was convinced that once he kidnapped this woman, that she would eventually fall in love with him. Bob would tell police later that this movie really affected him throughout his life and helped him to develop his dark fantasies, which resulted in him killing 6 people. Yes, horribly
That's
killing.
Minimizing when you say killing 6 people.
Killing 6 people. Horribly, yes. Forewarned. Spoiler alert. After high school, Bob enrolled in the Kansas City Art Institute in 1967, where he aspired to become a college professor. It was during his second year at school, Bob began to develop an attitude of anti-authoritativeness and began abusing alcohol and drugs. He even became a small-time drug dealer and was arrested twice for dealing drugs. During this time in Bob's life, he began to develop sexual fantasies that involved torture. This is also the time where he began torturing and killing animals.
Well, there you go. Check the box for serial killer.
Honestly. He boiled a duck alive and he killed a chicken. He also killed a dog by injecting it with drugs and sedatives to see what would happen. He was expelled from the art school in 1969 after using the dog as part of an art exhibit.
Oh my God.
Yeah, this injecting the dog with these drugs was an art piece of his.
And he didn't think that'd be a problem for the college? What?
Right. He did all of these things in front of other people. Like the boiling of the duck and the killing of the chicken. He didn't do these in private. They were done in front of all of his peers. I know you would think that he would think, maybe this won't go over very well.
It's a screw loose.
After being expelled, Bob got involved in the neighborhood watch programs.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. And volunteered in programs created to help teens and young men to turn their lives around. He also became an accomplished chef.
God.
But I promise you, if you don't know this story already, he did not cook and eat people. I can tell you that at this point.
Why'd you have to ruin it for us?
I know.
He did much worse things.
Yes, he did much, much worse things. In his early 20s, he purchased a house in Kansas City and lived his life openly as a gay man. He would often pick up young boys who were sex workers, runaways, or drug addicts, and would try to help them get clean and turn their lives around. He began to rely on these men for companionship and friendship, and he developed a sexual relationship with some of them. This gave him a bit of control over these kids, and he would loan them money and sometimes allow them to live in his house rent-free in exchange for sex. It was also at this time he opened an antique and small curiosity shop and a flea market that he named Bob's Bizarre Bazaar.
How clever.
I know. At the flea market, he met Paul Howell and his son, Jerry Howell. Jerry and his friends used to tease Bob about his homosexuality, but Jerry later confided in Bob that he and his friends sometimes earned money as sex workers. Bob's friendship with Jerry grew, and as it grew, Bob's fantasies began to star Jerry. He would masturbate while fantasizing about bondage and causing pain to Jerry. What really turned Bob on, though, was the thought of keeping someone prisoner and turning him into his own personal sex toy. Despite their friendship, Bob was a bit angry with Jerry because Bob had helped pay for a legal bill that Jerry had, and Jerry always had excuses as to why he couldn't pay Bob back. Every day that passed that Jerry didn't pay him back, Bob's resentment grew. On July 4th of 1984, Bob picked up Jerry and they came back to Bob's house. They were partying, drinking beer and smoking weed, as well as injecting themselves with street drugs, including cocaine. It had been several months since the two had been sexually intimate with each other, even though Bob had tried several times since. Jerry always rejected him, which made Bob really angry since he felt like Jerry owed him for helping him out so much. On this evening, Bob made the moves on Jerry again, and Jerry resisted. So instead, Bob injected him with a heavy dose of tranquilizers, which was enough to render Jerry unconscious, and Bob tied Jerry's hands behind his back once he was knocked out.
I feel like I'm getting ready to be hit with a sledgehammer.
Yeah, buckle up. While Jerry was unconscious, Bob raped him several times. So many times that Bob wasn't able to ejaculate anymore. However, the assault wasn't over for Jerry. Bob continued to rape Jerry, but now he did it with cucumbers and carrots.
Oh, God. Oh, God.
He did it so much, Jerry's rectum began to bleed profusely. With each new assault, Bob took Polaroid pictures to capture the moment. This horrendous assault continued throughout the day and night. The next day, July 5th, while Jerry was sufficiently drugged up, Bob went to a shop at the flea market, leaving Jerry tied to a bed. After being at work for 5 hours, Bob closed the shop and was excited to get home so he could continue his assault on Jerry. When Bob got home, he continued his assault on Jerry. He continued taking Polaroids. And also, he was filling out a detailed journal that included the position and time these rapes took place. He beat Jerry with a metal rod on the back for no apparent reason other than he was still angry with Jerry. Unfortunately, by 10 p.m. that evening, Jerry's body just couldn't take it anymore, and he passed away. He died by choking on his own vomit. Bob was now faced with what was he going to do with Jerry's body. He took Jerry down into his basement, suspended him by his feet by pulleys that were installed in the ceiling. Bob drained Jerry's blood by cutting his jugular and also by cutting arteries into his arm, and he drained the blood into a cooking pot. While the blood was draining, Bob took many photographs as usual. As Jerry was hanging upside down, Bob used his chef knives to try and dismember him. But Bob's knives were not going to be able to cut through the bone, so instead, Bob used a gas chainsaw to chop Jerry's body into more manageable pieces.
It's like a movie.
I know!
And that's going to make a mess all over.
I can't even imagine.
In our episode, How Not to Get Away with Murder, he used a saw, and the problem was it just shot body pieces all over.
I can only imagine this chainsaw did the same. After he chopped up Jerry, he carefully wrapped each piece of Jerry's body in paper and plastic, and placing them with anything else he could think could be evidence, like clothing or something, but not the precious photos. He then put the packages into garbage bags, which he placed on the curb the following Monday, and then watched as the garbage men threw the bags into their truck, which disposed of Jerry's body at a landfill. His body was never found. He was only 20 years old. In the spring of 1985, Bob invited a guy named Robert Sheldon to come and stay with him for a few weeks and to party with him. Robert had done this several times in the past. While Robert was visiting, Bob went back and forth in his mind whether he wanted Robert to be his next would-be sex slave. As they partied into the night, Bob injected Robert with many tranquilizers, but Robert stayed conscious, and Bob decided against going forward with his plan. The next morning, Bob found Robert on the bathroom floor, sick and complaining of stiff joints. Bob, worried for Robert's well-being, took him to the hospital, and Robert was sent home with penicillin.
You know how weird that is right now.
Mm-hmm.
That's so weird.
I know.
He took him to the hospital?
Took him to the hospital.
Okay. He might have made him a sex slave, but instead, he's going to take him to the hospital.
Took him to the hospital. Make sure he's okay.
It's so fucked up. I remember why I liked this story.
Do you?
It's so fucked up.
It is really jacked.
It's so good. I'm thoroughly enjoying listening to
Me
it
too.
again.
It's been a while since I've heard this story. I told this story. I'm like, I forgot everything that happened. Robert went home with Bob back to Bob's house, and that night, Bob and Robert partied into the night. And again, Bob tried to carry out his sinister plan of making Robert his sex slave.
I thought he wasn't going to make him a sex slave.
I know. I think he's changed his mind now. He injected Robert with more heavy doses of tranquilizers, which included crushed Valium. After Robert finally passed out, Bob tied his legs together and carried him upstairs to his bedroom. Bob raped Robert many times throughout the night and sodomized him with a carrot and a cucumber. Bob wasn't done, though. He thought about what would happen if he put liquid Drano into Robert's eyes, thinking Robert would be a much easier captive if he was permanently blind. He put Drano in Robert's left eye and ear and made notes of this in his journal.
Oh my gosh, Tanya, I can't even imagine. We did the hi-fi episode, and they had to drink Drano, and in just touching their skin, it dissolved it.
Yes.
His eyes.
And his ear. When he put the Drano in Robert's ear, Robert screamed, which only made Bob more excited, and his desire to continue to inflict pain on Robert continued. Bob used pliers and a hammer to crush the bones in Robert's hand, and he did this while he was stroking his erection. Worried, though, that the neighbors might hear Robert's screams, he injected Robert with more tranquilizers. For the next 4 days, Bob raped, sodomized, and beat Robert mercilessly, sometimes with a steel pipe. Bob ignored Robert's pleas for him to stop and got more and more cruel and creative in his torture.
How could he get any more cruel than he already fucking has?
Girl, I'm going to tell you.
Why'd I ask?
You knew it was coming anyway. He heated a wire hanger to tattoo the word hot onto Robert's back, left shoulder. He also used caulk to fill in Robert's ears, hoping to deafen him. And Bob was quite disappointed when the caulk just fell out of Robert's ear the following day. Bob grew fascinated with needles and injecting Robert and would poke needles in Robert's testicles and under his fingernails just to see the reaction of the heavily sedated Robert. Robert was also the first victim to have Bob's new 7,000-volt electrical transformer used. It had alligator clips, which he attached to Robert's nipples, and gleefully watched Robert's body violently react to the electricity coursing through it. Bob also realized he could pierce Robert with a hypodermic needle and then attach the alligator clip to that, and it wouldn't fall off after the electricity stopped. So it was like conducting through the hypodermic needle. Bob had tied Robert up with piano wire and noticed that it was causing nerve damage in Robert's hands because it was tied so tight. He wrote that down in his diary because damaged hands would make escape difficult for Robert. Throughout this torture, Bob took many Polaroids and made meticulous notes in his journal detailing the type of torture and drugs used on Robert. One of the electrocution sessions lasted about 5 minutes, and during that time, Bob took 17 Polaroids. Bob eventually suffocated Robert with a plastic bag after he came home one day and found a handyman he had hired several months earlier trimming the trees around the house. Fearing that the handyman would hear Robert, Bob placed a clear plastic bag over Robert's head and then watched, fascinated, as Robert gasped for breath, his eyes bulging and his chest heaving despite all of the drugs in his system. After a few minutes, Robert was dead. That was April 19th, 1985.
Death probably was a relief for him.
Probably. Bob dismembered Robert's body, this time in his bathtub. He decided to keep Robert's head as a souvenir and buried that in his backyard. He disposed of Robert's body the same way he got rid of Jerry's body, packing it in smaller parcels, disposing of it in the trash, and having Robert's body taken out by the sanitation workers to the city dump. Robert was only 18. In the summer of 1985, a few short months after Robert's murder, Bob hired Mark Wallace to do some work for him. Mark was a homeless young man and accepted the job offer since he needed the money. As Mark did yard work, Bob got a little thrill seeing Mark standing on the exact spot where he buried Robert's head. Bob fantasized what it would be like to rape Mark. On June 22nd, 1985, Bob invited Mark inside for a few beers.
Don't go, Mark.
Don't do it, Mark. Mark drank with Bob and began to get a little tipsy. At some point, Bob asked Mark if he would like to be injected with some tranquilizers to help him relax, and Mark accepted. Bob injected him with some tranquilizers and topped it off with ketamine to make sure Mark was knocked out. Side note, Bob had access to animal sedatives because he bred chow chow dogs and would get the drugs through veterinary supply sources. With Mark unconscious, Bob tied his hands together and turned him on his stomach. He pulled Mark's pants down and rubbed his erection between Mark's buttocks until he climaxed. He then took a carrot and sodomized Mark for several minutes before deciding to carry him upstairs to his bedroom. This dude never quits.
Fucking carrots. Oh, Jesus Christ. I'm not going to be able to look at a carrot the same for at least a week, man.
About 5 a.m., Mark started to come to, and Bob raped him 3 more times before 7 a.m. He allowed the drugs to wear off because Bob enjoyed the muffled screams Mark made while he assaulted him. If Mark fought back too hard, Bob would hit him in the head with a rubber mallet. He also used the mallet to repeatedly strike Mark's testicles.
Oh, Jesus, Mary and Joseph.
Enjoying his screams of agony. For the next several hours, Bob raped Mark, electrocuted him by attaching the alligator clips to his nipples, and switched it up by attaching the clips to Mark's swollen testicles.
I don't even have testicles, but it sounds so painful.
I feel like I feel it.
I know.
It's bad. All throughout this torture, Bob continued to make meticulous notes in his journal and snapped hundreds of Polaroids. At 11 a.m., Bob injected Mark with a large dose of tranquilizers as he was planning to leave the house to go to a shop at the flea market. He got home about 4 p.m. and found Mark trying to untie himself. This just enraged Bob, and he injected Mark again with a heavy dose, which knocked him out. Angered, Bob prepared a large syringe with dish soap and gave Mark an enema. He hoped to not only clean Mark of feces and blood, but also hoped it would lubricate his anal cavity enough. So, are you buckled up?
What?
He wanted to insert his arm into Mark.
Oh, just stop. For real. Just stop.
I didn't say the F word.
I knew there was a part. I'm
trying to be delicate with the fisting word. I'm not going to say it.
Stop. You keep trying to talk.
I promise. Stop. I'm not going to say another word.
Okay, Tanya, you can continue now.
Ultimately, he wasn't able to fit his fist into Mark's rectum.
Thank God.
I know. Whew. Throughout that night, Bob raped Mark and also used razor-sharp syringe needles to poke and cut Mark. He made sure to make notes when he found a particularly sensitive spot, such as Mark's testicles or eyeball. He continued to inject Mark with drugs all night. The next morning, noticing his torture methods were causing no effect on Mark, Bob checked Mark's pulse, which was non-existent.
What do you mean no effect?
He killed him. He was dead.
Oh, that makes sense.
So when he was poking him, Mark wasn't moving. He noted in his diary, 7 a.m., no signs of life. This was June 23rd, 1985. That night, Bob dismembered Mark's body as he had done before to his other victims. He wrapped Mark's body parts in plastic, then in empty dog food bags, then in garbage bags. He took these parts out to the curb, as garbage pickup was the following day. Mark was 20 years old.
One of the worst. Every time I think, oh no, this one's the worst, now I'm going to remember Bob.
I know, Bob is awful. Mark's murder happened about a year after Bob killed his first victim, Jerry. So with Mark's murder, Bob officially became a serial killer. Bob was extremely disappointed with Mark's death. Mark had only lasted 2 days, and Bob wanted so bad to have a long-term sex slave who was willing to obey every command and submit to every whim. He never wanted anyone to die.
Please.
I know. He just wanted them to endure horrendous torture. Bob realized he would need to pace himself if he was going to be able to make his fantasy come true. Around this time, police were investigating Jerry Howell's death, his first victim, mostly because Jerry's father kept putting the pressure on the police. Bob was questioned in connection with Jerry's death since it was reported that Jerry was last seen with Bob. The only connection, though, that the police could make was that they were both gay and knew each other through the flea market. They did have a source who was a sex worker named Todd Stoops. Todd had lived with Bob for a short time and had said that Bob liked to give, quote, hot shot injections, end quote, to his lovers.
What's that?
I don't know. I'm thinking it's got to be some kind of drug. I just don't know if it's tranquilizers, uppers, downers, what. He was injecting cocaine, too. Todd told the police Jerry probably died by an accidental overdose given to him by Bob. However, Todd was in jail the night Jerry went missing, so he never actually witnessed anything and the police just moved on. In the winter of 1985, Bob had another run-in with the police. He was questioned about selling pot to 2 young men named Walter Ferris and Gene Shaw. Bob knew Gene from the flea market and had sold the 2 guys a bottle of tranquilizers, which they asked to exchange for pot the following day. When the police showed up to the flea market a few days after that, Bob was convinced that Walter had set him up. In September 1986, so this is almost a year later, Bob and Walter's path crossed again. Walter, his friend Gene, who was the second guy, and Bob started hanging around each other and partying at Bob's house, often late into the night. Walter and Gene would often call Bob at all hours of the night, stoned, looking for a place to crash. After one of these times, Bob came home to discover the 2 had broken into his house and rooted through his stuff looking for drugs.
Oh, I bet he got pissed.
Oh, yeah, he was pissed.
And you don't want to piss Bob.
No, you don't.
Don't want to piss him off.
Mm-mm. On September 26, 1986, Walter called Bob and asked him to meet at a popular gay bar in Kansas City. They met around 7:30 p.m. and Walter asked Bob if he could stay with him for a few days. By this time, Bob had already began formulating his plan to keep Walter as his captive, and he happily agreed to allow Walter to stay with him. Absolutely, come on over. They returned to Bob's home, and Bob crushed up several tranquilizers in a bowl of chili, which he gave to Walter to eat. Walter was unconscious by 9 p.m., sleeping on the floor. Bob injected him with more drugs to render him helpless and not able to fight back at all. The cycle of rape and torture began again for this fourth victim, poor Walter. Bob repeatedly sodomized Walter for 3 hours before Walter began to regain consciousness, which gave Bob the perfect timing to try out his new torture device.
Oh, shit.
Yeah, it just gets worse. Before I tell you about his new torture device, we're going to take a break. Bob's new torture device was he had attached metal spatulas to the 7,000-watt transformer, which allowed Bob to move the electrical current to wherever he wanted on Walter's body. Like, he didn't have the alligator clips anymore. It went through the spatula. He would electrocute Walter for 4 to 5 minutes at a time on his genitals and eyelids. With each shock treatment, Walter's body would jolt upright and became rigid and stiff, trying to scream in terror and agony through the gag that was held in place by piano wire in his mouth. In between electrocutions, Bob would rape Walter, and this continued until sunrise. For some reason, Bob decided to take Walter's temperature, and he was running a bit of a fever, around 100 degrees. Bob was concerned that Walter had this fever, so he injected him with antibiotics to make sure any infection was kept at bay. Walter wasn't able to sit up or fight back, and just before midnight, Bob noted in his diary that Walter had labored breathing and was snoring heavily. Just after midnight on September 26, 1985, Bob noted that Walter was, quote, 86, unquote, which was common terminology used in the restaurant business for a product that was expired, or in this case, dead.
Yep, I remember 86 board we'd have.
Yeah, really?
When you ran out of stuff.
Ugh. Bob dismembered Walter's body in the bathtub and disposed of his body in the same way as the 3 men before him. He was only 20. While Bob was disappointed that Walter died so soon, he felt a great deal of satisfaction that the guy he suspected of trying to sell him out as a drug dealer to the police died a painful and violent death at his hands. The next victim was Todd Stoops, who was the guy who had told the Kansas City police that Jerry Howell had probably died of an overdose at the hands of Bob. As I mentioned before, Todd had lived with his wife and Bob for a time in 1984, and Bob thought that Todd was attractive. Todd and his wife were drug addicts and needed a place to stay. Todd had rejected Bob's sexual advances, fearing that his wife would find out. However, in July 1986, Bob couldn't believe his luck. He picked up Todd, who, after serving some time in Oklahoma, lost touch with his wife and was in desperate need of another fix and a place to stay. They went back to Bob's home, where Bob gave Todd a peanut butter sandwich heavily laced with tranquilizers. Throughout the night, Bob raped Todd repeatedly, and so much so he could not maintain an erection. Shortly after 7 a.m., Bob pulled out his electrocution device and started electrocuting Todd's eyelids, hoping to blind the man, and this torture restored Bob's erection. For the next 17 hours, Todd endured a horrific cycle of rape, electrocution, and torture. At one point, Bob bent Todd's index finger back so far it snapped. Bob excitedly noted in his diary that he was able to carry out what he wanted to with Mark by inserting his arm into Todd's rectum. He was successful at it this time.
I think I'm going to vomit. I can't breathe.
I know. And
what the fuck are you doing? Oh my God. Not you. Him.
I know. This lasted several minutes.
Oh my God.
Todd began to bleed profusely from his rectum.
Oh my
and
God.
Undeterred, Bob began whipping Todd with an electrical cord.
Oh, let me just
take a second for a breather.
Just take a second. Is it time for a break?
We just had one.
Oh, damn it. Okay. All right. Okay. I'm going to find a happy place.
This torture caused Todd to writhe in agony, which excited Bob. And despite having a gag in his mouth, Todd made a lot of noise. Bob decided to inject Drano into Todd's vocal box in the hopes of damaging Todd's voice to quiet him. He was careful not to get any Drano in Todd's throat so that it wouldn't end up in his stomach and poison him.
This is a lot like the Rulo cult murder, remember?
Just incessant torture.
Yeah, just when you think it can't get any worse.
It gets worse.
It gets worse.
The next day, Todd regained consciousness and Bob fed him.
God, that'd be awkward.
Right? Ugh. Todd couldn't keep it down, though, and Bob noticed Todd was developing a fever. He injected him with antibiotics, and as the day went on, Todd cried and begged Bob to stop and let him go. He told Todd he was never leaving, and if he didn't do what he asked, he would continue to whip and electrocute him until he wished he was dead.
What is he asking them to do?
Right.
What does he want them to do? Nothing but be complacent.
Right, be complacent.
To extreme torture.
Accept the torture.
How can you? Your body's going to react.
I know. The next day, Todd was able to keep some food down, but had no energy anymore to fight Bob off. For the next 13 days, Todd could not stop Bob from doing whatever he wanted, and Todd grew weaker and weaker.
13 fucking days.
13 days. The damage to Todd's rectum was so bad that Bob no longer sodomized him, but instead would just rub against him for sexual gratification. I know, it's just... On July 1st, Bob carried Todd to the bath and tried to clean him up. He noticed Todd's breathing became very labored. Bob tied Todd to a chair because Todd was unable to sit up on his own. Around noon, Todd died, unable to continue to fight the infection of the rupture in his rectal wall, caused by the violent, unrelenting abuse from Bob. The garbage pickup didn't come until July 7th, 6 days later. So after dismembering Todd, Bob kept the packages of his body parts in his basement, hoping the cooler temperatures would slow the decaying of poor Todd. He was only 21. Bob hadn't found anyone to replace Todd as his next victim. He couldn't find anyone that he thought was worthy in the months after Todd had passed away. It took him about 11 months before he found someone that he thought was worthy enough. He got a call from a guy named Larry Pearson. He was a homeless man that Bob had known for several years. The reason why Larry was calling Bob was that he was in jail. He had been arrested for indecent exposure after flashing cars during a drug-fueled bender.
Wow.
Yeah.
Just when I think I've gotten shit-faced.
I know.
Somebody that's gotten more shit-faced.
I know. I've never done that.
Nope.
Haven't been that drunk.
Not that I remember.
Yeah, not that I remember. Larry's bail was $150, and he wanted to know if Bob would loan him the money so that he could get out of jail. When Larry called, Bob was on his way to visit family in Ohio, so he told Larry he'd only agree to bail him out if Larry could come with him to meet his family in Ohio. Larry agreed because he really had no choice. He wanted to get out of jail, so he agreed to come with Bob to see his family in Ohio. They spent a week in Ohio before they went back to Bob's home in Kansas City. Larry stayed for the next 2 weeks, sleeping on Bob's couch with no sign of getting a job or helping around the house, which really pissed Bob off.
And we know what happens when Bob gets angry.
It's not good. Bob began to formulate his plan to keep Larry as his sex slave after one night when they went to see the movie Creepshow. On their way home, they passed several male sex workers on the street. And Larry...
Wait a second, time out. I have never passed several male sex workers on the street.
Girl, I don't know.
Maybe, I guess. I don't know.
Maybe.
It's just, I'm sorry.
I don't know where this movie theater was.
I'm just saying. I just want to point it out to our listeners.
I wouldn't even know where to find one, frankly. But
right.
Anyway. Larry laughingly told Bob about how he and some of his friends used to beat up sex workers for fun. And again, this just really enraged Bob. The next day, the two were drinking heavily and Larry passed out. Larry was a larger guy, and Bob wasn't able to carry him up the stairs, so he decided to drag him down into the basement. He injected Larry with a lot of drugs, tied him up with piano wire, and injected his voice box with Drano. For the next 5 days, Larry endured the cycle of rape, torture, and electrocution that was experienced by Bob's other victims. Larry didn't fight back since Bob had explained the rules to him, and Larry had made the mistake of screaming and shouting early in his captivity, and then he was severely punished with electrocution, so he knew to keep it down. Bob also hammered Larry's fingers. After the first week, Bob moved a mattress to the basement because sex on the basement floor was uncomfortable. Larry was becoming very cooperative, and Bob told him that Larry was going to have to be his sex slave and that Larry had to call him Master Bob.
Whatever you want, Bob. That's whatever you want.
Whatever you want.
Put the carrot away.
No doubt, right? Larry was kept for almost 3 weeks before Bob moved him to an upstairs bedroom. Bob made him wear a dog collar and nothing else and led him by a dog leash up the steps. Larry became more and more submissive, acting like he was enjoying what Bob was doing to him. And Bob allowed him to eat breakfast with him. Bob told him he would allow Larry to stay in the bedroom upstairs with the TV on as long as he behaved. If he misbehaved, he would be moved back to the dark basement. Bob became more relaxed with his sex slave and even began receiving oral sex from Larry. In early August, Larry had been Bob's sex slave for almost 2 months. On the morning of August 5th, 1987, the morning routine was going along as it had been. Smooth sailing.
Smooth sailing.
Smooth sailing. Bob was receiving oral sex from Larry when he felt immense pain. Larry had bit Bob's penis as hard as he could. Enraged, Bob beat Larry unconscious with a wood board. Afterward, Bob drove to the hospital to be treated and received several stitches.
How do you explain that to the hospital personnel?
The doctors told Bob that he was going to have to stay in the hospital for several days, but Bob told him he had to go home and check on his dog, who he told the doctors had just had puppies. He said he would come back to the hospital and took a taxi home, fearing that Larry had woken up by now. When he got home, though, Larry was still unconscious. Bob was pissed because he had stitches in his penis.
Oh my goodness gracious.
And he knew...
I didn't know you could get stitches in a penis.
Me neither. And he knew basically it's out of commission. He can't use it for several weeks. So because he was so angry, he suffocated Larry with a plastic bag, since Larry would serve no use to him anymore. This all occurred while the taxi was still waiting outside. Bob turned the air conditioner up full blast before taking the taxi back to the hospital, and Larry laid there dead for 3 days before Bob was released. When Bob got home from the hospital, he took Larry's body into the basement, where it took him 2 days to dismember him due to his weakened condition.
Larry must have really did a number on him.
I know.
And Bob's a wimp. After all he's doing to these guys, and Bob can't handle one penis bite.
I know. You think he'd like it?
Yeah.
I
mean, he likes to
inflict, not to receive it. In addition to the stitches he also had a catheter that was inserted into his bladder. He had to use the chainsaw to dismember Larry due to being weak, and he noted in his diary how easy it was to cut through a dead body compared to someone newly killed. He also didn't have to worry about draining Larry's body of the blood since it began to already coagulate and harden. Larry was only 20.
Who knew all these things, Tanya?
I know. I'm learning so much, unfortunately. Bob decided to keep Larry's head, which he wrapped in plastic and kept in his freezer for a week before he buried it in his backyard, replacing Robert's head with Larry's.
What did he do with Robert's head?
Robert's head was in like an advanced stage of decomposition, so he took the head and soaked it in a bucket with water. He removed Robert's teeth with pliers, putting the upper and lower teeth in separate envelopes. He put the skull and teeth in a closet where he kept his photos and everything else that reminded him of his victims. On March 29th, 1988, Bob picked up 27-year-old Chris Bryson. Chris was homeless. He was on the street a lot. And Bob invited him upstairs to watch TV. When Chris went up the stairs first, Bob took a metal pipe and bashed him on the head. Chris stumbled on the steps, and Bob quickly moved and injected Chris with tranquilizers and tied his hands behind his back. Bob sexually assaulted Chris with his finger and took a bunch of Polaroids. When Chris began to wake up, he tried to scream despite having a gag in his mouth that was in place with piano wire. Bob then tried to gouge Chris's eyes out just to see what would happen. I don't know if he just used his hand or if he used something. When that was unsuccessful, Bob then took cotton balls soaked in bleach and put them on Chris's eyes, dabbing his eyeballs. And Chris began to shake uncontrollably from the pain. Oh, I can't even imagine.
This just continues to surprise me.
Bleach hurts when it's on your skin.
The irony is I've heard this before, and I'm still sitting here stunned.
I know.
I didn't remember any of this.
See how you compartmentalize, right?
It's buried someplace deep in my psyche.
Deep. I know, I forgot to. Ugh. By this time, Bob was quite experienced in causing torture, and he knew what caused the most pain. He took the metal pipe and smashed Chris's hands. He electrocuted Chris. He injected Drano into his vocal cords, and he violently raped him. After he was done with that, Bob explained the rules to Chris. He told Chris if he tried to bite him, he would pull out all of his teeth with pliers and no painkillers. He was going to do it when he was still alive. He also told Chris if he tried to escape, he would break his arms and not set them properly. He also showed Chris the Polaroids of the other victims that he had raped and killed.
Having seen some of those Polaroids, because they are online, they're terrifying.
They are very traumatic to look at. Yeah, I've seen some of them too, and they are scary. Chris began to submit to Bob, and they developed a routine. In the morning, Bob would engage in anal sex with Chris, tie him up very tightly to the bed, gag him, and turn on the TV very loudly so the neighbors couldn't hear anything. And also, Chris wouldn't be able to hear when Bob came home. Bob would go to a shop and return after several hours. One night, Bob returned home with several packs of film and forced Chris to pose like a fashion model while he took pictures before raping him. The next morning, Chris asked Bob if he could just not tie him so tightly since it cut off his circulation before he left. Bob loosened it up a little bit, and this routine of not tying him up so tightly lasted for 2 more days after that. On April 2nd, this is now April 2nd, 1988, which is 4 days since Bob picked him up. After their morning sex ritual, after Chris was sure Bob was gone, Chris got loose and he managed to climb out the second-story window. He jumped from the window and broke his foot upon landing. He was nude except for a dog collar with the leash still attached. He stumbled to a neighbor's house and he was just banging on the door until they answered. Eventually, the police were called. When the police showed up, they were shocked at the story Chris had to tell them. He told them how he was kept captive, repeatedly tortured, and raped. At first, they thought maybe this was just a little lover's quarrel, but they realized soon after Chris told them the story that this was no lover's quarrel. More officers were called, as well as an ambulance for Chris. 2 officers ended up knocking on Bob's door. He wasn't home yet, so they waited for him to arrive. When Bob showed up, they arrested him for the sexual assault of Chris. On the way to the station, they asked Bob if he would consent to having his house searched. He asked what for, and they told him they were investigating a possible sexual assault. Bob asked them, quote, "What's his name?" unquote, and the officers hadn't told him whether the victim was male or female. The sergeant that was there responded that she really didn't feel like she had the liberty to go further and tell him more, to which Bob asked, "Well, where is he?" She responded with, quote, "We have him and he's talking," unquote. He must have shit his pants.
Yeah, AKA, you're fucked, Bob.
Bob responded that he wasn't going to give them any information and he wasn't going to consent to having his house searched. He also said under his breath over and over, "This isn't right."
No, it's not right. I can tell you, it's not right what's going on.
I know, unbelievable. He's pissed that he got arrested. The injustice of it all, right? Yeah, okay. Police eventually got a search warrant, and they found everything. They found Bob's torture diary, the photos he took, and Robert Sheldon's skull.
Can you imagine reading that diary?
Damn.
Actually, you just did.
I did.
Spent the last hour reading it.
They found over 300 Polaroid photos of 20 different men. Bob was charged with 7 counts of sodomy, 1 count of felonious restraint, and 1 count of first-degree assault for what he had done to Chris. Bail was set at $500,000. It was revoked when an officer testified that one of the men in the photos appeared dead. Police searched Bob's house again, and that's when they found Larry's skull. He was the last victim that was killed, buried in the backyard. Bob was charged with the first-degree murder of Larry and pled guilty to avoid the death penalty. He was also charged with the first-degree murder of Robert Sheldon, and he made a plea bargain that he would confess in exchange for life in prison. Bob then gave a detailed confession of all of his crimes. In addition to pleading guilty in the first-degree murders of Larry and Robert, he pled guilty to second-degree murder to the other 4 victims I told you about. Also part of his plea was that he got to keep his property at his shop at the flea market, which he sold by auction from jail.
What?
I know, what?
They have a plethora of evidence against him.
Why are they letting him sell his shit from jail?
I don't know. And he's got teeth. He's got a head. He's got a police system, blood everywhere.
Everywhere. I'm sure when they put luminol, the place lit up. None of the bodies from any of Bob's victims were ever found except for Larry and Robert's skulls. Bob was sentenced to life in prison. He was deeply disturbed that his good name was being put through the mud in the press. So in order to try to get back in the public's good graces, he announced he set up a trust fund in the amount of $50,000 for the families of the victims.
This is a joke. This is a joke.
Tell me about it. I'm still going to think you're a gross asshole. You could put up billions of dollars. I'm still going to think you're disgusting, right? So the home where Bob committed these atrocities was purchased by a local millionaire who had the home demolished and then donated the land to the Hyde Park Neighborhood Association.
That was nice.
I thought so. In TV interviews, Bob blamed police for his crime, saying they should have caught him sooner.
Bob gave TV interviews?
Mm-hmm. And they're online.
Of course Bob did.
You can find them on YouTube. In January 1992, Todd Stoops' mother filed a wrongful death civil suit against Bob, and she was awarded $5 billion. Because he couldn't pay this, she was given a judgment against any future earnings Bob may have made, which really prevented him from writing a book and making any money off of his story. On October 8th, 1992, Bob died from a heart attack in prison. He was 43 years old. After he died, the wife of one of his victims, and that person ended up being unidentified in the article I wrote.
Gotta be Todd.
So yeah, I'm not sure if
Wasn't
it was
he
Todd's
the one
wife.
that was in Florida?
Yeah, Todd had the wife, so maybe it was her. She said, quote, "We didn't get Bob executed, but God did," end quote. So that's my horrible, horrible story of the Butcher of Kansas City that we have had to relive now twice.
Thanks, Tanya and Lynn Marie Jane, for that awful revisiting of the story. Oh, man, I feel like I got a true crime dose and a half there. Seriously. It's one of those I feel dirty.
I know.
Watch myself.
This one was bad.
You forget how bad it is after a while.
These poor guys.
I hate Bob.
What a sicko.
Just some screws missing. Not even loose. They're missing.
Right, they're missing, like, all because he wanted a sex slave.
He doesn't get the atrociousness of his crimes.
No, he really didn't, because he's ridiculous. He's upset that the media made fun of him and whatever, but...
Insulted his good name.
It's just ridiculous, so... Anyway, everyone, if you have not subscribed or followed us on the app that you are listening to us on, please do so.
You'll get weekly notifications saying we've got a new episode.
You don't want to miss it.
No.
Also,
No,
you don't want to. If you want to find out more information about our members-only episodes,
which this was one of them, so you can get more like this,
you can go to our website. There's information on how to become a member, or you can go directly to patreon.com/TNTcrimes, and you can sign up there.
Our website's tntcrimes.com.
Yes, and like I said, you can see all of the episodes we have done for Patreon. We've done over, I think, 50 full episodes, and we also have minis, so depending on your membership. We are also on social media. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram at Hardcore True Crime. Talia, we have some shout-outs before we go.
We have a lot of new members. We are really growing. Yay! So let's do this.
So welcome, Amber.
I'm going to hold my applause.
Dee, Liz, Jesse, Disa, Jamie, Compton, Alana, Rachel, Maria, Faye, Kate, Andrew, Erica, Melinda, Kendall, Pamela, Catherine, Stephanie, Jennifer. I think it's pronounced Vibeki. Excuse me if I mispronounced your name. Elizabeth, Carla, Sterling, Tia, Nay, Danielle, another Danielle, Jill, Jackie, Monica, Stacy, Lauren, Octavio, Jamie, Elizabeth, Tammy, Carol, Leslie, Roy, Allison, Colleen, Barbara, Nick, and Matt.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you to all of you, and welcome to the Members Only Club.
Yay!
We hope that you have joined our Facebook page because we do a lot of live episodes from there.
So click the link we sent you.
And don't forget to put in the secret code. So I think that's it.
That sounds good to me.
And everyone, until our next episode.
Don't kill each other.
Bye.
Bye.